Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Football Fix International Break Wildcard live stream. This is going to be all about those wildcards this live stream. So if you have it activated for game week 9, then you are in for a treat this live stream. And if you have already activated it or you're not planning on it, this is still going to be plenty of value for you, because in this live stream, we are going to be discussing, of course, those wildcard drafts. We're then going to be looking at the teams to target over the coming game weeks, the player projections over the coming game weeks is in particular as well, and of course answering all of your questions that you have throughout this live stream. Before we kick it off, make sure you are hitting that like button on this live stream. It is massively appreciated as always. Cheekstar, I can already see, is in the chat and has asked a very valid question already. What is your soft drink of choice for tonight's live stream? Tonight it's gone a little bit more hardcore. We've gone for a coffee. I know, a bit extreme at 6:30 in the evening, but coffee of choice is going to be, so we are raring to go for this live stream. So as I mentioned, the itinerary for this live stream in particular is going to be wildcard focused, but it doesn't mean that it is completely specific on wildcards. So as I said, it is going to be value for everybody that is tuning in. Now, of course, as I mentioned, if you are new around here, make sure you do consider hitting that subscribe button. Massively appreciative to everybody that is already a subscriber, and if you aren't already, I do think it will offer a lot of value to you across the course of this season. So let me know if you're in the chat, guys. Let me know where you're tuning in from. It's always interesting to see if people are tuning in from the UK or where else in Europe or the rest of the world. It's always great to see. And importantly, let me know, are you tuning into England's international friendly tonight? I personally likely will not be, as we all know, English international football can be a little bit of a drab sometimes. So Regan, hope you're doing well. Bowen or Madison is one of the first questions. Isaac or Tony? Really great questions there. It's something we are going to touch on in a minute in this live stream, because they are going to be quite wildcard specific players as well. So I'm going to deep dive into those two. Don't worry about that. And Wayne saying Solanke or Tony on wildcard. Great question again, Wayne, and we are going to be discussing those two on the wildcards. I really do think that they are two players that we can be considering depending on the sort of investment that you want to make into your squad. And what I mean by that is where you prioritize yourself right now in the season. I think for a lot of managers right now that are sat there wanting to be a bit more differential, then I think the Solanke route is going to be that option for a lot of managers. But again, we are going to be touching on that. Don't worry. Eric's tuning in from USA. That's awesome to see. Cheeks, is there a better game week to wildcard than game week 9 not activated mine yet? Cheeks, that's a really good question actually, and something that I haven't actually scheduled for this live stream, so I can quickly touch on that one now. Game week 8 was obviously a very popular time for a lot of managers to wildcard because of the blank game weeks that we were having. Game week 9, a very popular time because you can basically have it throughout the international break and ride out through some of the potential injuries that are going to happen. We've already seen it with Patterson, Everton, Luca Digne, and of course Newcastle's Isaac. So if you are wildcarding right now, you can kind of just have those players in and out of your team, and you don't have to worry about having to permanently transfer them out with your free transfers or of course a transfer hit. Now, outside of game week 9, I think there are a few other options available to us. First and foremost, game week 12. Because of the blanks for both Arsenal and Man City, a lot of managers right now are sat there with double or triple Man City and potentially double Arsenal. And having those players in game week 12 is going to cause issues to a team. Now, of course, with free transfers, you can look to move away from those teams. But there is quite a significant fixture swing around game weeks 12 onwards. Now, if we look at that for some of the big teams, Liverpool, off the back of Arsenal and Man City, have West Ham, Nottingham Forest and Leeds. Fantastic fixtures for Liverpool over that period. And also just getting at the fixture ticket over on Fantasy Football Fix here, we can also see a little bit of a swing for teams like Leeds, Aston Villa. I know we're not really particularly focused on Aston Villa. Chelsea with Brentford, Man United, Brighton and Arsenal. You're probably going to want to look to move away from Chelsea over that period. And Spurs have Man United, Newcastle, Bournemouth and Liverpool. So I think game week 12 is a time that's going to be focused on a lot of managers. I also think game week 13 is a popular time as well, just to really have almost a condensed wildcard team between then and the World Cup. So game week 9 would be still my priority, but I think game week 12, game week 13 is still a time that a lot of managers are going to be considering, just because of that blank game week in game week 12 for certain managers. And Reagan's there saying we're tuning in from South Africa. That's awesome to see as well. So Without further ado, guys, let's kick off with a first wildcard draft that I have created. We're going to touch on some of the players and why I've selected them and why this might not be a specific wildcard for you, depending on the type of manager you are and where you are currently sat in the rankings right now. So let's go and check that one out. Okay, guys, so here we have the first wildcard draft that I have created. I'm going to touch on it in a little bit more detail in a second. But firstly, what I want to say is, for those managers that have currently activated their wildcard, why the international break is so important is that you can potentially now and then ride out price changes. What I mean by that is, some players might rise in price twice over the international break because it is a 2-week period. And if a player does do that, if you own him before the double price hike, you then get 0.1 million in value that you can then sell that player on. So for example, Kevin De Bruyne, a very popular player, if you bought him at the start of the international break and by the end of it he had rose by 0.2 million, it does happen sometimes, you would have gained 0.1 million in value, and then you can sell him on and have a higher squad value, which naturally means that you can afford better players in your wildcard team. Now, in order to track the wildcard, the price changes, my biggest advice right now for this live stream is to check out Fantasy Football Fix's price change predictor. You can download the free app. All the links are in the bio. It is the best way to track these price changes. Now, what I want to say is a lot of people have been on, obviously, the app checking it out. And it is worth noting that wildcard transfers do not contribute towards price changes. So you may have seen a lot of players above the 100% threshold and thought to yourself, he's going to rise in price tonight. He's going to fall in price tonight. It's worth mentioning that it's very difficult for the algorithm to sometimes pick up those wildcard transfers. So just be cautious of that sometimes they can be a little bit skewed because of the high volume of wildcards that have been activated. But honestly, guys, if your wildcard is activated, you need to check out the price change predictor over on Fantasy Football Fix. You can download the free app. So here is a wildcard draft in front of your eyes right now, guys. And first and foremost, I want to touch on the players that I deem essential going into game week 9. So these are players that whatever draft that I have created have basically just been in my team every single time. Now, in the goalkeeper department, you're going to think I'm crazy, but Ward has still been in every single one of my drafts. Now, of course, you're probably thinking, what is in that coffee there? Have you got some sort of alcoholic beverage? It isn't the case at all. It very much is the case right now that Leicester are terrible defensively. However, they still have a 4 million goalkeeper in Ward that is playing week in, week out. Now, it's worth noting, there could come a time where Everson does step up to the plate and replace Ward, but right now, there's still no inclination that that is going to necessarily happen. And while Ward remains between the sticks, I think it's a no-brainer that we still have him as our reserve goalkeeper. And that is the big thing here, guys. Do not have him as your starting goalkeeper. We've seen what he is like, but he's perfectly viable as a backup goalkeeper at 4 million just to leave on your bench week in, week out. And it's also worth noting that Leicester's fixtures are turning for the good. They are looking fantastic. And while they cannot keep a clean sheet to save their lives, the fixtures are still fantastic going forward. And if there ever was a time for them to eventually keep a clean sheet, it is going to be over those next 4 or 5 game weeks. It is worth noting. So Ward has still been an ever-present in every single wildcard draft that I have created. Cancelo is the next one. Now, a few managers are a little bit question marks about Cancelo because of his blank in game week 12, but I still think with the upcoming fixtures that Man City do have, I'm just going to reiterate them here for those on the stream. Man City's fixtures coming up are Man United at home. I still think that's a decent fixture. Southampton at home, a fantastic fixture. Liverpool away, tricky as we know. Blank in game week 12, and then Brighton, Leicester, Fulham. So I think these are fantastic fixtures coming up for Man City. And although he blanks in game week 12, I think he is a valuable enough asset just to simply bench in game week 12 and continue to hold throughout that period. So Cancelo has been in every single one of my drafts. Reece James is the other defender that has been ever present. I think with Reece James, the positions that he was taking up in that Champions League fixture under Graham Potter are looking very, very promising. It looks like Graham Potter wants to have a similar effect to what Tuchel had with the wing-backs, getting high and ever-present in the box. And that, for me, a 6 million for Reece James just feels like a no-brainer. And with the fixtures coming up for Chelsea, Palace away, Wolves at home, Villa away, Brentford away, Man United, and then Brighton, I think that's a good enough fixture run for us to consider Chelsea assets, and Reece James is top of the charts for me in terms of defensive coverage. Now, looking at the midfielders, there are a few that have been ever present, as I mentioned. First up is going to be Maddison. We've touched on the Leicester fixtures. They're looking absolutely fantastic. And Maddison himself is the only player in that Leicester team that is doing the business right now. And I do think that if Leicester are going to have a kind of change in fortunes, Maddison has been fantastic already. He's only going to be elevated as an FPL option. And at 7.9 million, I believe he's priced at right now. It's fantastic value. And just to reiterate the fixtures, Forest at home, Bournemouth away, Palace at home, Leeds at home in the next 4. I view that as some of the best fixtures over the next 4 game weeks. And for someone like Maddison, I feel like if you are wildcarding right now, he's an absolute lock in your teams. And the other player is going to be Wilfried Zaha. Again, Zaha has been an absolute talisman right now in the Crystal Palace team. Of course, had a recent blank because of the rail strikes against Brighton. But with Wilfried Zaha, I do believe that he is going to be an ever-present in all teams. Apologies, going to update this a minute. So I think Wilfried Zaha with the fixtures coming up for Crystal Palace are fantastic. Chelsea at home, yes, on paper, does seem like a tricky fixture, but I actually do think it is still a good fixture for Wilfried Zaha. Followed by Leeds, Leicester, Wolves, Everton, Southampton. They are good enough for me to have Zaha locked in the team for a wildcard. Now, Andreas Pereira, still one of the best cheap midfielders. I think he's the best option for your wildcard drafts in that cheap department. And then the other ones, Haaland. Obviously, Haaland is going to be the pick. There's no denying that he's the better option. Haaland right now, a lot of managers have built a value in. There is nothing to think that Haaland isn't going to be a fantastic option going forward. Now, of course, he does have a blank in game week 12, it is worth noting, but still, we just bench Haaland for that period. He is too good of an option to not have. And Mitrovic is the final player that I have as a wildcard essential. I know he blanked in game week 8 and he wasn't necessarily at his best, but Mitrovic, the value that he's offering right now, and the fixtures coming up for Fulham, Newcastle, West Ham, Bournemouth, Villa, Leeds, Everton, scream value to me. And importantly, 3 of the next 4 are at home, which I really do think is offering fantastic value. Sample size is small, it's worth noting, but Fulham at home are looking decent. I think it does play to Mitrovic's strengths on that small pitch. So Mitrovic for me, an absolute essential in those wildcard drafts. So let me know what your thoughts are, guys, obviously, on this current wildcard team. Now we're going to touch on some of the players that are different to the next wildcard draft that I'm going to show you. And this is going to depend on what kind of manager you are. So first and foremost, the double up in Newcastle defence, Pope plus Trippier. Now, my problem right now with the Newcastle defence is that from an underlying stats perspective, they aren't screaming out in terms of value, in terms of defensive stats that they should be a team that you double up on. They're sitting about 10th in the underlying stats, which is not too bad considering the fixtures that they've played against Man City and Liverpool. And we know with Trippier and Pope, they can be bonus point magnets. We saw that with Trippier over the course of this season so far, being on free kicks, set pieces, just general creativity at Newcastle team makes him a fantastic option. The reason why I'm against the Newcastle double up, and this is going to be the same for certain players like Tony, is my question to you, and this goes to you guys that are watching right now. If you are wildcarding now, why didn't you wildcard in game week 8? Now, the reason I'm saying that is because with this draft, we're looking very much like the game week 8 wildcarders. Double Newcastle defence, Tony up front, Martinelli, Salah, the big differential. My question to you right now is, if you were to go for Newcastle double up, why didn't you activate it in game week 8? That is the big question right now, because for me, it feels like an opportunity to go against the Newcastle defence. Now, 1 Newcastle defence, I think is absolutely fine. But 2, I start to question, maybe you should have wildcarded in game week 8. And what was your reasoning for wildcarding in game week 9? I think it's enough of a reason for us to go slightly against what other managers have in game week 8. And it's also worth noting, Fulham away, I think, is a very tricky fixture from a defensive perspective. Brentford at home, we know Brentford, who travel, are awful. So I think that is a good fixture for them defensively. But then Man United away, I'm not expecting a clean sheet there for Newcastle. For over the next 3, I can see maybe 1 clean sheet for Newcastle in the next 3. Obviously, let me know in the comments, guys, do you think that I've got that absurdly wrong? But for me, I feel like that is that's not fixtures that I'm scared about for not having double Newcastle defence. So I mentioned Pope, Trippier, and the other one is going to be Tony. Now, we know Tony had a tough time against Arsenal, but Brentford did in general in that fixture, it is worth noting. And Tony at his price point right now is offering fantastic value. And with Bournemouth, Newcastle and Brighton in the next 3, I still think Tony offers fantastic value, it is worth noting. But I believe it's another player that a lot of Game Week 8 wildcarders may have gone to. And it's another opportunity for us, if you are wildcarding in Game Week 9, to slightly go against the grain and go for a different option. Now, would I go against Tony? I still think he's a fantastic option. There's no doubt about it. But I just think if you want to go against the grain, he is the man to kind of swing against. Now, the combination that I mentioned to you of Pope plus Trippier plus Tony are predicted to score in the next 5 game weeks 56.3 points. Now, I'm going to reiterate that figure later on because we're going to touch on a wildcard draft too with a different 3 who you might think on paper don't look as good, but actually outscore the 3 that you're currently seeing on your screen right now. So I will reiterate that later on, but 56.3 points in the next 5 for that trio seems good, but I think we can do better in the next wildcard team that I'm going to reveal to you guys. And last up is going to be Mo Salah in this draft. Now, Mo Salah for me, if you are wildcarding in Game Week 9, feels like an essential player. Now, it comes back to the argument, if you didn't wildcard in Game Week 8 and you're wildcarding in Game Week 9, if you're not having Mo Salah, why didn't you wildcard in Game Week 8? Now, I see a lot of people with the strategy right now of going for KDB to start off your wildcard 9 in Game Weeks 9 and Game Weeks 10. And then in Game Weeks 11, go into Son for that home fixture against Everton. And then move into Mo Salah in Game Weeks 12 onwards with the fixtures, West Ham at home, some decent fixtures after that. But for me, I think free transfers are so important in this game. If you are scheduling in these premium moves, first and foremost, it's quite naive because we've seen injuries happen all across the board. And for you to think that it's just going to be, plain sailing between now and Game Weeks 11 where you're bringing Son and Game Weeks 12 where you're bringing Salah, I think that is going to be a little bit hopeful for your teams. Now, looking at the fixtures for Salah, Brighton at home, I don't think is a bad fixture at all. I think with Liverpool, the way I'm viewing it is with Fabinho, Thiago and Matip all returning to this team, I just think that turns them from, we have to think about the players that they're replacing right now. Gomez, off the back of that long-term injury, clearly isn't the player that he once was. He's going to need plenty of time to find that sort of form. James Milner, who clearly is on his last legs right now. And of course, the other player in the midfield is going to be the Harvey Elliott's or the Hendersons in that position. So for me, Liverpool's team go from quite average replacements to a top tier replacements. Matip, Fabinho and Thiago, you don't come much better than that. And I really do think that Liverpool are going to find that old form going into this fixture run that they have because effectively they need to. Liverpool, mentality monsters. I've always said it year in, year out. And I know that mentally they probably have been a little bit drained recently because of obviously them getting Champions League runners up, second in the Premier League. They probably are just drained. But for me, the international break has come at a perfect time. Mentality monsters are what Liverpool are. These 3 fixtures, Klopp are going to be absolutely piling into these Liverpool players to say, if you don't win these 3, league's done. And I really do think that Liverpool do step up in these sort of moments. So for me, Brighton at home, a fantastic captaincy alternative to Haaland if you want to go down that route. Arsenal away, we've seen goals in that fixture. It doesn't scare me for Salah. And Man City at home, look, that's a free hit for us managers if you do own Salah. But my question to you is Kevin De Bruyne that much better in that game week? I think that's the big question mark right now. So let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are. I rambled on quite a bit there in terms of that draft there. I personally am not big on the premium rotation of doing KDB for 2 weeks, Son for 11, Salah for 12. And it's worth noting as well, over the next 3 game weeks, 9, 10 and 11, Salah is predicted to score 16.6 points and KDB is predicted to score 18.3. So we knew that KDB was going to be above Salah because of his home fixture against Southampton. We knew that. But I don't think there's a big enough of a swing there in the projected points to think that KDB is essential right now in our drafts. I think Salah, you just lock him in and you keep him for the long term. Otherwise, you should have wildcarded in game week 8 is my view personally. Otherwise, you know you're going to want Salah in game week 12 onwards. So you're almost just penciling in a transfer that you can just get done and dusted right here, right now. So let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are. Obviously, as you can tell the way I'm talking, I have quite strong opinions on this for going for Mo Salah in terms of an option in our draft. So please do let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are. Mads is saying, hello, what do you think of two 4.5 million goalkeepers on rotation, e.g. Raya and Gaita, or Meslier and Raya/Gaita? Okay, so that's a really interesting comment there, Mads. First and foremost, what I will say is rotational goalkeepers is something that I haven't been a big fan of in my experience of playing FPL. Now, a brilliant factor of it is, of course, that if you get the right combination, you can effectively have, let's say, a goalkeeper that plays at home each and every game week, which naturally means that you're going to have the favourable fixture each and every game week. But when you start to get investments in a 4.5 million goalkeeper, it's very hard to predict when these big hauls are coming. Now, naturally, if you are a 4.5 million goalkeeper, you're not playing for these premium teams like Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool, etc. So usually their hauls do come in games where they have high accumulation of save points, keeping that clean sheet and getting the high top bonus. We've seen that. So it's very difficult to predict when those massive hauls are going to come. And from my experience, I found that trying to predict which 4.5 million goalkeeper is best each and every game week is almost an unnecessary headache to have in FPL. Now, of course, if you want that sort of headache, then absolutely crack on with it. Right now, I don't know what the best rotation is going to be for goalkeepers, but I can do a bit of digging after this live stream and put a post up on that, so don't worry about that. But I like it if you are willing to have the headache. But for me, thinking about FPL is enough of a headache in itself. Trying to think about which goalkeeper to play week in, week out is something that I personally don't like to deal with. I'd rather stick with one 4.5 million goalkeeper or a 5 million and be done with it, and accept that with goalkeepers, they're a very rare breed where their points can accumulate in the weirdest games ever. You know, they could concede 3 goals, but then if they save a penalty, they could get top bonus and a monster haul, and you could have had that sat in your bench. And that's just something I don't like to deal with in FPL personally. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'd be interested to know. And Eric's saying, why aren't Leeds players being seen as decent differentials? They have good fixtures in 5 of the next 8 game weeks until the World Cup. And yeah, Eric, I think that's a fantastic point there. With Leeds fixtures coming up, with Villa at home, Palace away, Arsenal, Leicester, Fulham, Liverpool. As you mentioned, very mixed bag of fixtures, but decent fixtures nonetheless. Now, I think my question is going to be, which player do we consider for the teams? I personally don't view Leeds as defensively a good team to bring in. And I look at those fixtures and don't think they're good defensive fixtures. I think Crystal Palace away, they concede. I think Arsenal, they concede. I think they concede against Leicester. Fulham potential for a clean sheet there. But realistically, I maybe see 1 clean sheet over that next 6 game weeks. But from an attacking perspective, I do think there is value there. Now, realistically, we're going to be looking at Sinisterra. We're going to be looking at Aronson. But again, I just don't think he fits into the wildcard drafts that we're building right now. Rodrigo, depending on his injury status. Bamford, I don't think we can consider. We haven't seen him play a full game for a long time. And on that basis, I need to see a sustained amount of game time before we can consider Patrick Bamford. So I think it comes down to Sinisterra, Aronson in the midfield, or of course Rodrigo. Realistically, I don't think that a Leeds option is top of my priority right now, but I do agree with you that they are fantastic differentials if you want to go down that route. But for me right now, I think Leeds is an avoid. I want to see how they integrate Bamford back into the team, what that does for Rodrigo's minutes and going forward. Worth mentioning, I have seen the projected points going forward, and Harrison in the midfielders below 7 million does come out second best, only to, I believe, Harvey Barnes, Harrison second, and Martinelli third. So Harrison looking like the best Leeds option if you are considering one right now. Hope that helps, Eric. I see Tom's put a really good point there about Brentford and Palace probably being the best rotational for 4.5 million goalkeepers, excluding Leicester as an option, because of course Leicester are terrible. So Amina's saying Kane or Reece James. I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer because obviously they both play in differing positions. If I had to prioritise one, it would be Reece James though. Kane, no doubt, is a fantastic option, but I think the structure right now is to go for a premium midfielder and a premium forward. And based on that, I think Reece James at his price point is a better investment in your defence, and then going for the structure that I mentioned in your team. And Raphael saying, Salah is poor, not only this season, his poor form comes from the AFCON. He's scored only 8 goals in his last 28 games. He is a big no for me. And yeah, I think that's a really good point there in terms of the way that he's been playing so far this season. Now, you'll be able to see this on your screens right now, but I just want to quickly highlight the underlying stats for Salah so far this season, because of course, over here on Fantasy Football Fix, we do come to conclusions a lot of the time based on underlying stats, because we know output doesn't always dictate the value of an FPL option going forward. So look, Mo Salah let's compare him for midfielders so far this season. I'm just going to read these out to you right now. Based on expected goals, Mo Salah is 4th best at 2.54 expected goals. The players above him right now, McAllister, and we know that he scored a fair few penalties, Raheem Sterling and Wilfred Zaha. No Kevin De Bruyne above him, no Son, no Diaz. Again, the narrative right now is that Mo Salah has been woeful, but still he continues to deliver in the underlying stats department. Now, of course, absolutely appreciate the argument that the output still isn't there. 6 games, 2 goals is not good enough for someone of Mo Salah's stature and price point. I'm with you on that one. But the underlying stats are still solid for Mo Salah. And something else that I really do like to see is the expected assists. Now, Kevin De Bruyne comes out on top of this at 3.77 expected assists. We know that with Kevin De Bruyne, is an absolute monster when it comes to chance creation. Second best is Pascal Gross on 2.24, but then third best is Salah on 1.79. So what we're seeing right now is that creativity for Mo Salah alongside the potential for goals. Now, it's worth mentioning, with the return of the players of Matip, Thiago, Diego Jota, what we did see prior to them returning to the team was a slightly different Liverpool team where we almost had Trent Alexander-Arnold playing as an inverted fullback, actually progressing up the pitch, meaning that Mo Salah was operating much more as a winger rather than an inside forward, which we've come accustomed to over the past few seasons. For me right now, clearly what has changed with the Liverpool team hasn't worked under Klopp, and I really do believe that he is going to go back to that bread and butter football, basically. And I really do think we're going to see the best of Mo Salah return, with the midfield returning of Fabinho and Thiago, Matip in the centre-back role, being able to progress with the ball out from the back that he does so well on that right flank, bringing Trent higher up on the pitch. It means that Mo Salah is going to be able to get into those attacking positions. And for me, I would expect that expected assists to not necessarily increase, but his expected goals to increase in the coming game week. So I'm going to be anticipating a bit of a prediction here that he's going to be much more of less of a chance creator and more of a goal scorer in the coming game weeks. But again, that's just my own eye test right now as we speak. But look, the output's not good enough right now for Mo Salah, there's no denying, but the underlying stats are still decent. And what I'm reading from that is still potential for him in the coming game weeks. And again, guys, if you are enjoying the stream, please do drop a like on it. We always try and hit 50 likes. I see we've got about 60 of you in the chat right now. If we can get that to 50 likes, that would be absolutely fantastic. So enough chat about the wildcard draft here. Make sure you do have it kind of memorized or screenshotted if you do want to take note of it. But it isn't necessarily my most preferred wildcard draft. So we're going to come on to the fixtures and some teams that I do think we need to consider for our wildcard drafts. And then we'll be looking at a second wildcard team where I'm currently favouring based on fixture-driven analysis. Okay. So, upcoming fixtures, guys. Now, as I mentioned, that first wildcard team that you saw was very much almost like a shield wildcard. It was very much a team that was defending against those that wildcard in the game week 8, bringing in double Newcastle defence, bringing in Ivan Toney, kind of going for that sort of strategy. However, if you want to be a bit more aggressive with your game week 9 wildcard, and I do think that's the sort of route that you might want to go down, then looking at upcoming fixtures is the best way to do so, because we can look to bring in players that might not necessarily have looked as good in game week 8 that are looking better in game week 9. So coming up right now, the best attacking fixtures for any team is Bournemouth over the next 4 game weeks of Brentford, Leicester, Fulham and Southampton. And a certain Dominic Solanke is looking like a fantastic value pick in terms of the forwards. Now, of course, Dominic Solanke so far this season hasn't necessarily been a player that we could consider from an FPL perspective because his returns have been, let's say, not the best. Looking at his actual returns so far this season, if I get him up on my screen, again, guys, I do apologise you won't be able to see this, but I can obviously read it out for you. 5 games, 1 goal, 0.52 expected goals, 0.44 expected assists. Not the sort of stats that we want to be seeing right now for Dominic Solanke, in particular a player that we might be considering for our wildcard drafts. However, it's been very much a transitional phase for Bournemouth right now. The sacking of Scott Parker, the introduction of an interim manager. I do think that we are going to be seeing a slightly different Bournemouth. Whether that is good or bad for Solanke is the issue wildcarders have right now, because there's a little bit of uncertainty how Bournemouth are going to be set up over the coming game weeks, because there still hasn't been a manager actually announced at Bournemouth who might bring different ideas over the next 4 game weeks. So it is worth mentioning that as a little bit of a risk if you are considering Dominic Solanke. But based on fixtures, I really do think at around 1.5 million cheaper, Solanke could be a fantastic differential against those managers that went for Ivan Toney. Solanke currently sat at about 1% ownership, on penalties, guaranteed game time, fantastic fixtures. He is currently one of those players that has been heavily featured in all of my wildcard drafts. Again, very similar to those at wildcard in Game Week 8 who went for Bowen at West Ham. Very little underlying stats to back the logic of going for him. The only real logic was the minutes and the fixtures, and that logic exactly applies for Dominic Solanke. Now, second best on the upcoming fixtures, attacking-wise, is going to be Leicester as well. And this just doubles down on why I think Maddison is an essential pick in our Game Week 9 wildcard drafts. As I mentioned, Maddison has been absolutely fantastic so far this season. One of the standout performers in a team that have been absolutely woeful, it is worth noting. And when I look at Maddison's actual stats so far this season, he has actually been producing some decent underlying stats. So if I just get him up for myself to see. Maddison, okay. So expected goals, 1.3 expected goals, 0.34 expected assists, and 3 goals, as we mentioned. So he's operating quite well so far this season. And with the upcoming fixtures that they do have, Forest at home, who are struggling so bad defensively, Bournemouth away, I think that could be tricky, and then Palace and Leeds at home. That's enough of a reason for me to consider Maddison as an essential pick for our wildcard drafts. I think he's a fantastic option. And hopefully, if Leicester can sack Brendan Rodgers, it might just elevate Maddison once again as a fantastic option. Villa, although the fixtures are fantastic, I can't necessarily justify any real player to consider over the coming game weeks from an attacking perspective. Crystal Palace, again, very similar to Maddison, Zaha, with the fixtures coming up, with his talismanic sort of input in that Crystal Palace team and being on penalties, an absolute lock in our wildcard teams. Now, I know a lot of managers do have him, but I don't think that's a reason for us to avoid him. It is logical to go for Zaha. And in terms of the actual XG so far this season for midfielders, Wilfried Zaha is out on top on 2.99. Now, a lot of managers want to know, what does the player look like for expected goals when you take away the penalties? Wilfried Zaha with penalties, 2.99 expected goals. Without penalties, 2.23. So still fantastic underlying stats. It's not like his underlying stats have been completely dominated by the penalties like a certain McAllister's have been at Brighton. So Wilfried Zaha looking like a fantastic option for our wildcard teams, both on the underlying stats department and on the upcoming fixtures. And last up, Fulham, 5th best fixtures, decent fixtures, as I mentioned, at home, which is really important for Mitrovic owners. And another reason why Mitrovic is still a fantastic option in our wildcard drafts and offering brilliant FPL value. Although he blanked, he needs to remain in your teams. Okay, defensively, we're going to quickly touch on this. Leicester, best defensive fixtures worth noting. So I think that's enough of a reason for us to stick with Ward as our backup goalkeeper. Yes, he plays every game week. No, he isn't good. He's woeful. But as I mentioned, he's a brilliant option if it happens where you need him to come in for your teams in a 1 week period. Fulham defensively are second best. I can't really recommend any right now as we speak. But hopefully we can get few options emerge in the coming week where we might consider them as cheap alternatives in our wildcard drafts. West Ham, again, very difficult for me to get excited by any. Emerson would have been the pick, but I think there's too much rotation risk there with the likes of Cresswell. We don't know what formation they're going for, a back three, a back four. Based on that, I don't think Emerson is the best option right now, even though the fixtures are good. And again, Southampton, very hard for me to get motivated to bring in any Southampton defensive coverage. But the one that I am interested in is Crystal Palace from a defensive perspective. Now, we touched on Nick Pope being a very popular Game Week 8 wildcard goalkeeper choice, but I actually think Crystal Palace's Gaeta is the popular pick for Game Week 9 wildcarders. He's about 0.7 cheaper than Pope, which is very important for those managers that might not have massive squad value. He could be a nice inroad into that Crystal Palace defence. The fixtures are decent, and Palace's underlying stats for a general team are good as well. It's enough of a reading for me to think that they're actually going to be putting up okay numbers. Looking at Crystal Palace right now for expected goals conceded, 10.97, and they've conceded 9. They're about mid-table for the underlying stats, and it's good enough for me to think that Gaeta is a good option for our wildcard drafts. The one thing I am going to say about Gaeta, because we are going to touch on Gaeta in a wildcard draft, is I'm a little bit worried about Gaeta's game time. Now, do not quote me on this, but Sam Johnson signed last season from West Brom, and I think the anticipation was for him to eventually become the number one in that Crystal Palace team. Now, from what I know, Vicente Gaeta has been in good form so far, and there's no reason for him to get rested. But I do just think it's worth noting that there is a chance that could happen at some point. Whereas Nick Pope at Newcastle, you know there is zero chance of that happening apart from injury. I do think there is a slight risk of Vicente Gaeta now and then getting rotated. And if there was a situation where potentially Sam Johnson came in for that one game and performed well, we could see him sidelined for a significant amount of time. Again, all assumption, but I just want to have that caveated that it could happen because they have a fantastic backup goalkeeper. And another reason why, if you go for the strategy of Gaeta, you need to go for Ward as your backup goalkeeper, because we know that he plays, unless of course he loses his spot to Iverson, and then in that case we just end FPL and we just give up if that situation does arise. But it's a quick wrap up of the upcoming fixtures, guys. Obviously, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments here. I'm going to quickly cover some more comments in the live stream, and then we're going to dip on to wildcard number 2, where we're going to be building a draft more around the fixtures coming up and swinging against the Game Week 8 wildcarders. Because as I mentioned, I really do feel like if you've wildcarded in Game Week 9, you do need to go slightly different to those Game Week 8 wildcarders. Otherwise, I really think you've lost that kind of edge that you have. I think if you just build a squad that is effectively 1 week behind everyone else, then you're just kind of lost that real significant edge that is giving you in FPL. So we're going to cover that off, guys. And again, 25 likes on the stream. Please do like it if you are enjoying it. It does help the algorithm, of course, and it shows that you are enjoying it, which is always great for the ego. So, Sir Moomin, great name. Liverpool been shaky start due. They needed to play Gomez with VVD and midfield that was barely mid-table level with Matip and Thiago back, and maybe Henderson as well. They will improve a lot. And I absolutely agree with that. I really do think that the absence of Matip has been absolutely colossal for Liverpool. I honestly do think that last season Matip was one of Liverpool's best players. He was better than Van Dijk and didn't get the plaudits necessarily for it. And with Gomez, I think he is a good defender. But coming off the back of such a significant injury, with someone like Gomez, he needed to come back into a Liverpool team that were just purring, winning week in, week out. And Gomez could come in, no kind of like headlights on him. He could just come in, do his business and gain that match fitness. But with the injuries to both Konate and Matip, he was thrusted back into that Liverpool team who were playing so poorly and so many players underperforming that Gomez effectively needed to go from 0 to 100 incredibly quick. And clearly the fitness, the match sharpness and the confidence just hasn't been there right now for Gomez. So I think the return of Matip is just going to really steady the ship for Liverpool. I think we saw that in the Ajax game as well when he made his return to the Liverpool team. And Thiago's presence in that Liverpool team is just phenomenal. One of the best anti-pressers in the game. And what I mean by that is effectively very similar to the likes of Kovacic, Busquets. Of midfield trying to squeeze Thiago, you don't even get touch tight to him in either. He's gone round you, the ball's gone, and then he's on to the next pass. So players like that are so absolutely criminally underrated, and they just get teams ticking, and it's so important for Liverpool's system right now. So yes, I absolutely agree with that. I think we're going to be seeing a different Liverpool team if those two can remain fit. The big problem right now is they are injury-prone players. P2 saying KDB or Kane. Again, very much going to be dependent on your FPL strategy and your wildcard, but I probably would prioritise KDB over Kane in the coming game weeks. Cheek saying, FPL Nacho, have you activated your wildcard for Game Week 9? Yes, I have activated my wildcard for Game Week 9, Cheekster. Basically, my current process for the wildcard team is holding the players that I have gained value in, and then bringing in players that are potentially rising in price in the hope that I'm going to catch some price rises on them. I haven't actually selected my wildcard team, but it is worth noting that the team I'm about to show you next is very close to my current wildcard draft. It is worth noting on that one. And Paul Gibbons is saying Martinelli or Maddison for the next 4 or 5 game weeks. I think that Maddison is the play to go for. Now, of course, those managers that have, so based on your question right now, Martinelli or Maddison, I think it's kind of dependent on the situation. I think if you own Martinelli, you've built up quite a lot of value in him. That is a very difficult sell. If you had him from game week 1 at 6 million, now priced at 6.6 million, if you sell him at 6.3 and you want him back, you're going to have to pay over the odds to get him back in. So if you own Martinelli, I would stick with him. If you have a shootout right now between Martinelli or Maddison, then I would go for Maddison of the two. His projected points are better than Martinelli. The fixtures are better. And importantly, he doesn't blank in game week 12, which I think is significant. And Moni saying Kane or Mitrovic. I would go for Mitrovic. And he's also saying, when will the website update the Game Week 9 algorithm squad? And Tom's answered that one in there. We'll say update next Friday, but we will reveal it in a video next Thursday. So again, guys, another reason to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, because we do drop a lot of information throughout the week. And importantly, on Thursday, we do drop the algorithm 11 with Eddie FPL Phillips. So make sure you do check that one out on Thursday and get the notification bells activated so you are alerted by that video, because they are one of the best videos that we do in the week. So guys, let me get to my wildcard draft number 2. And as I mentioned, this is going to be very much a draft that is, I believe, quite an aggressive draft that is going to be getting ahead of the curve, going against game week 8 wildcarders. And I think that's quite an important part of the game right now. So let's get to wildcard draft number 2. So here is the second wildcard draft, guys. Now it's worth noting, based on projected points for game week 9 in isolation, they are predicted to score the exact same points. So it is worth noting that. So what are the significant changes between draft 1 and draft 2? Well, players that have come into this team. Gaita, I have replaced Nick Pope and brought in Vicente Gaita, as I mentioned, to target those fixtures that are coming up for Crystal Palace that look decent for them. I've brought in Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, this is the big money move in the team. At 7.4 million, such a significant part of the budget that has been allocated to Trent Alexander-Arnold. And again, very much a situation where the fixtures, I would say from a defensive perspective, might not match up to his inclusion in the wildcard team. I think Brighton at home is a good fixture for them defensively. But then Arsenal away, I think Arsenal are per him right now, second best expected goals of any team. And I think Arsenal will score against Liverpool unless Liverpool do find that form and resilience that they did have last season. And Man City at home is anyone's game. That game has just been so unpredictable to call over the last few seasons. So Trent is probably raising a few eyebrows in the chat right now. But I do think that we're going to be a situation where all managers are eventually going to move back to Trent Alexander-Arnold. And wildcarding Trent into your team gets you ahead of the curve. And I think in particular in game week 9, it's a fantastic differential to have against those managers that maybe have Trippier, who is away to Fulham, which again, I mentioned, I do think is a tricky fixture for Newcastle. Other alternatives to the draft 1. The midfield is absolutely the same. As I said, Salah, Martinelli, Maddison, Zaha and Andres Pereira are players that have just been included in every single draft that I've built so far as a game week 9 wildcarder. But the big one is going to be Dominic Solanke instead of Ivan Toney. Now, we touched on the fixtures coming up, and this is going to be very much a fixture selection player. Like the Game Week 8 managers went for Bowen, with no underlying stats to back their decision making and mainly fixtures, we've done the exact same here with Dominic Solanke. And as I mentioned, guaranteed minutes on penalties and great upcoming fixtures. I really am not worried about Dominic Solanke in terms of that side of things. It's very much, can he deliver on a Premier League stage, scoring goals week in, week out? Because that's what we do need him to do to match some of the other forwards that are available to us. Now, I previously mentioned about the combination of Pope, Trippier, and Ivan Toney over the next 5 game weeks, predicted to score 56.3 points. Now, the combination that I mentioned of Gaita, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Solanke are predicted to score 57.7. So they're actually predicted to score about 1.5 points more than the trio that I mentioned previously. And I think it's quite surprising because I think on the face of it, if I said to you, Pope, Trippier, Toney, or Gaita, Trent, and Solanke, apart from Trent being quite like obviously a standout FPL asset in general, you would have definitely gone for the Trippier, Pope, Toney selection. So very interesting to see that the projected points are favouring this trio that I have on the screen right now. But as I said, I really do think it comes down to why were you wildcarding in Game Week 9? For me personally, there was a few factors. Mo Salah was the first one. I wanted him in my team, and I think that now I've wildcarded in Game Week 9, I have to go for Mo Salah, because then if I go for Kevin De Bruyne, I got to ask myself, why didn't I do it in Game Week 8 when they so clearly had the best fixture? I should have made that move early doors. So I feel I might be being a bit stubborn, but going for Mo Salah just feels like the logical move in a Game Week 9 wildcard to go early doors on him when I know a lot of managers are going to want to move to him eventually down the line. Now, I absolutely understand a lot of managers right now probably in the chat thinking Trent is a lot of money to invest when we could get some investment in Trippier, who was 2 million cheaper, and spread the funds elsewhere in that team. But as I mentioned, I really do think that Trent, with the return of Matip and Thiago, is going to again become a fantastic FPL option. And again, as I mentioned, it goes back to Mo Salah. A lot of people do think that Trent has been absolutely woeful so far this season. And again, I'm not backing him at all in terms of that he has been good so far this season. It is worth noting because end of the day, he hasn't delivered in terms of what he should have done for his price point. And it's highlighted here. In the expected FPL points, he has been predicted to score 26.52 points. Now, comparing that to the top tier is Cancelo at 42.51. So look, we got 15 expected FPL points between Cancelo and Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't be that big for a player of Trent Alexander-Arnold's ability. But as I mentioned, it's going slightly different to what the Game Week 8 wildcard has done. And I think Trent eventually is going to be a player that all managers are going to want to own. And whereas Salah, I think a lot of managers will have the premium midfielder slot available, and they probably could go up to Salah, I think Trent is going to be an incredibly hard player to own for managers later down the line. So it's kind of moving ahead of the curve. It's been a little bit differential, but at the end of the day, one of the best defensive assets over recent years. As a slight differential against the Game Week 8 wildcarders, I like my odds there. So look, Trent for me is in my wildcard team. Of course, as I mentioned, there can be serious repercussions with the team with the amount of budget that is being invested in him. And as I mentioned previously, guys, the other one is Gaita. The big issue right now is Gaita. I can foresee potential rotation for him. And if that does happen, we are going to need Ward to step up off the bench. So that's another one to consider. Now, the last player I want to quickly cover here, guys, is going to be Martinelli, because it's been a player that has been ever present in my wildcard draft. And I think this one comes down to what sort of situation are you right now with Martinelli? So for me, as I mentioned, had him since Game Week 1, so it's logical for me to keep him. Arsenal are the second best for expected goals. They are playing absolutely fantastic football, and they know exactly what they are doing week in, week out. We can see that with the way that they are drilled in that Arsenal team under Arteta. And I think the passage of plays and the ways that they are scoring is so methodical that I just think they know what they're doing, and it's so important when a team is well-oiled, very similar to a Pep Guardiola team. It's no surprise, guys, that when we see Man City score, week in, week out, we know that there is going to be 33% of their goals is going to be a Kevin De Bruyne ball that gets played across the 6-yard box for someone to tap into the back post. Like, everybody listening right now knows that that is an absolute trademark. Yes, trademark KDB goal, but trademark Man City goal. And I think what Arteta doing right now at Arsenal is very similar. Not saying there's necessarily a goal that they score that is completely their trademark, but I think the passage of plays that they're creating right now is going to be fundamental to them going forward. And I think that's why they are top of the charts pretty much for expected goals, behind Man City, of course. So Martinelli is a hold if you own him right now. If you're in a situation where you're looking to buy him, then I think there are question marks about him. It's 6.6 million with Tottenham, Liverpool, Leeds and a blank. I think the other considerations we need to have is Harvey Barnes at Leicester and Harrison as well. Both predicted to score more points than him over the next 5 game weeks, is worth noting. And I think Rashford's worth a consideration as well. Man United not really in the conversation, but I think Rashford is worth a consideration if we get confirmation that he has returned from his injury. So again, guys, let me know in the chat what your thoughts are on this wildcard draft. I know I have Patterson on the bench there. He obviously wouldn't be in this draft. This was created before we had the news about Patterson's injury. Very difficult for me to highlight a defender that I would swap him with right now. Interestingly, I would potentially consider a double up in the Crystal Palace defence. So I could look at going for someone like Guy if the money is available in the bank. I'm not too confident on Emerson at West Ham as an asset, is worth noting because of his rotation risk. Raphael's saying, so maybe Fabianski is the goalkeeper. And yes, I think Fabianski is a consideration in the goalkeeper department. Absolutely. Any game week blanks? Yes, Sino is saying. So we have a blank in game week 12 for Man City and for Arsenal, who play against one another. And yes, you're saying about no Pope and no Trippier. Yeah, that is the big thing right now. Very much a case of what kind of manager you want to be right now. Do you want to have some ownership in the Newcastle defence, which I absolutely understand because they are good defensively, and Pope and obviously Trippier are good FPL options. But as I mentioned, fixtures coming up, I'm not too bullish on Newcastle from a defensive perspective. What about Barnes? A Barnes-Maddison double up? I think it's viable based on the projected points. Maddison absolutely has to be the target for you, but then Barnes is coming up good on the projected points. My big worry right now is I don't think Brendan Rodgers knows exactly what he wants to do with this team, and we still don't know whether he's going to get the sack. So I think Barnes' minutes are the big question mark right now, whether he's going to get guaranteed game time. I think if he plays 90 minutes week in, week out, he's a fantastic FPL option. But again, we've seen fixtures where they have had Vardy and Nacho on the bench. They've started. Dak has played. I think Barnes' minutes is the big worry. And Maddison, we know, is going to play week in, week out in that central attacking creative role. And because of that, I think Maddison is enough of ownership right now in this Leicester midfield. And a lot of people saying about, yes, I can't see how this is a good move for Trent Alexander-Arnold. And I absolutely understand that. But as I said, I do foresee Liverpool returning back to the form that they had of last season. I think this international break has come at a fantastic time. And as I said, moving a little bit ahead of the curve, this is going for a wildcard 9 draft. I do think that Trent could be that differential player that we wanted going forward. And Eddie's saying, hi there, who the captain in game week 9? Haaland, Bowen, Mitrovic or Tony, please. Eddie, I think it's a fantastic time for us to come on to our last slide, which is going to be projected points over the coming game weeks. And I can highlight game week 9 for you as well, so we can look at captaincy. But again, just a heads up, guys, we do, of course, cover a lot of topics over the coming week going into the deadline. And one of those is going to be captaincy. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel as we do cover a lot of that. And again, we haven't hit 50 likes yet. So if you can get us to 50 likes, guys, in the last section of this live stream, it'd be massively appreciated because we always do try to aim to hit that. And you guys have always been amazing and got us to that benchmark every single time. So if you haven't done that already, just drop a like. It is much appreciated. And of course, if you haven't subscribed already, that would be massively appreciated as well. So let's come on to the projected points, and I can cover game week 9 in isolation as well for you guys. And make sure you are screenshotting this if you wanted to have it saved for yourselves, and maybe send it to a mate who is considering Trent. Okay, so here are the projected points for the next 4 game weeks 9 to game weeks 12. So a lot of these players right now are players that I mentioned who are essential game week 9 wildcard players, and the projected points over the next 4 game weeks are starting to highlight that there. Mo Salah, as I mentioned, Maddison, Haaland, Mitrovic, Zaha are all players that I feel are premium essential wildcard picks. And with these underlying stats right now and the projected points, that kind of just signals to me that the decision is right going for those assets. Now, some players on this list that I still wouldn't consider as FPL options. Vardy, for reasons spoken, can't guarantee his game time. There's too many good forward options available, and he falls in that awful bracket where we have to have Haaland, and having Haaland and Vardy is just not a structure that we can really justify right now. And the same kind of goes to Harry Kane. I think Harry Kane is a fantastic FPL option, but looking at the projected points of Mo Salah over the same period, I feel having Haaland and a premium midfielder is the best strategy for our team structures. Otherwise, if we go for the threemium, which is 3 premium assets in Salah, for example, or KDB, Haaland and Kane, I think that's a big investment in your wildcard draft, which is then going to mean you dipping in and out of players that you can't necessarily afford. You're probably going to have to sacrifice Maddison or Zaha or maybe even a Cancelo to afford those 3 players. And I think over the long term, that is going to really hinder your team. So based on that, I don't really think that is going to be a strategy that I would consider. KDB, as we said, isn't projected to score the highest points here, but it is worth noting that we have included game week 12, which they are blanking in. So that is going to skew the projected points a little bit. If you want to have a bit more of a kind of unskewed view over the next 3 fixtures, as I mentioned, I've covered this already. Salah is projected to score 16.6 points, and KDB is predicted to score 18.5, as you can see on your screens there. But of course, Salah plays in game week 12, which then means that his projected points are higher on this graph here. But over the next 3, KDB is projected to score 1.3 more points than Mo Salah. And Tony coming up at 17.7 points. Now, as I mentioned, Tony is not a bad FPL pick at all. He is still a fantastic option. There's a few caveats to Tony. First and foremost, when Brentford do play 2 up top, it doesn't suit Tony at all. They do need to go for a front 3 because having the 2 blokes either side of him just means that he's the focal point in that Brentford attack, and he can basically play as a centre forward. When he plays as a front 2 alongside Mbeumo or Vissa, it does have an impact on his underlying stats. I can't show you this on screen right now, but it's something that we have covered in previous live streams. And unfortunately, because of the unpredictability on what sort of formation they're going for, I think we just see a different Ivan Toney week in, week out. And if they do continue to have 3 up front, he's a fantastic FPL option. If they opt for the 2, we're going to see a different Ivan Toney from a negative perspective. And again, Son, 17.6 projected points, fantastic FPL option, delivers in game week 8 eventually with that hat trick, but not someone that I'm considering right now. I've seen a lot of managers go for the strategy of bringing him in game week 11 at home to Everton. I think that's a great entry point for him, but again, someone that is not currently on my radar. Now, Eddie, coming back to your question about captaincy for game week 9. I'm going to rule out Bowen first and foremost. I haven't seen enough for him in the underlying stats department to justify him as a captaincy option. Now, I haven't got this on screen for you guys, but I can call out the projected points for game week 9 in isolation. Sorry, it took me a while for me to get my words out there. Now, again, guys, as I mentioned, if you do want to check this out for yourselves, make sure you do head over to fantasyfootballfix.com. All the links are in the bio. And of course, with our projected points tool, it is ever changing. So the figures that I'm about to call out right now are figures that are going to change day in, day out based on expected minutes, underlying stats, fixture difficulty. So it's an ever-changing thing which keeps up to date with the most important updated news. So something you definitely want to get involved in, guys, as it is a fantastic tool that we have. Now, Looking at the projected points for game week 9, Haaland still comes out on top at 7.3 projected points. So I do think with the options that you are talking about right now, Haaland is still the man to go for. Maddison looking like a great alternative captaincy. I think it takes a very brave manager to go for Maddison over Haaland. But look, if you're at a rank right now that you have, I think that he could be a brilliant option. But with Leicester's unpredictability, I think there's enough of a caveat there to go for Haaland. And Mo Salah predicted to score a whole 1 point less than Haaland, but still a good differential captaincy against a Brighton side that have lost Graham Potter. Yes, they have got a new manager at the helm, but has had no time to really do anything with the team. So it could be a little bit of a difficult period for Brighton while they adjust to their new manager coming in with his different philosophy. And it's worth noting as well, something that I just thought about, just covering off, KDB, if you do own him and you have Haaland, I think it's going to be almost impossible for you to captain KDB over Haaland, because we know the effective ownership on Haaland in terms of a captaincy perspective is going to be monstrous week in, week out. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for you to look at it and think, I'm going to go for KDB over Haaland, even though I own Haaland. Whereas I think from a psychological perspective, going for Salah over Haaland feels a bit more of a differential move rather than going for the same Man City side, just a different alternative. So based on that, I think the combination of going for Haaland and Salah feels quite an attractive move, because as I mentioned, if you want to go differential captaincy in game week 9, I think you could do with a captaincy on Mo Salah at home to Brighton. Whereas I think it would take a very brave manager to go for captaincy on KDB over Haaland. I hope that makes sense there. But for me, I would find it a lot easier to go for captaincy on Salah because the fixture's different situation. Whereas I'm looking at Man United at home and I'm thinking, KDB is a great option, but can I go against Haaland? And I think realistically, you're always going to fall back on the default captaincy of Haaland. So let me know your thoughts in the chat, guys. It'd be really interesting to know. We're going to be wrapping up the live stream in a minute. So get any last questions you have in the chat and I will try and cover them off. Paul saying transfer out Perisic on wildcard. I think if you have Perisic, I probably wouldn't have him right now in the wildcard drafts. I think there's enough worry about the minutes to not consider him. And Eric saying, for the North London and Manchester derbies, which teams are you predicting to win and to perform better from an FPL perspective? Asking as someone who has 6 players from these 4 teams. Okay, so in terms of Man United versus Man City, I'm personally anticipating Man City to still win that fixture, personally. But I think it is going to be a trickier fixture for Man City than it has been over the last few seasons, just naturally because of what Erik ten Hag is doing to that team and instilling an actual philosophy about their play. But I still think Man City are the option to go for. And I think the big players always step up in those games. KDB, Haaland are still going to be the men in the money in that fixture. North London derby, always goals in that fixture. I think Harry Kane always steps up in that fixture. But I'm really intrigued to see how the new players like Gabriel Jesus, even Martinelli operate in that fixture. For me, I think that's going to be a score draw. I think it's going to be a 2-2. I'm hoping to see some involvement from Martinelli. And I think Harry Kane, as I mentioned, always steps up in those fixtures. Would you recommend Brennan Johnson instead of Solanke? No, I would still fancy Solanke personally. I think there's so much uncertainty right now about Nottingham Forest and their best team. All these players that they brought in, I just don't think they really know their best team either. And I think that does have an impact on their attacking assets in terms of minutes. Yacino saying, can you see a Southampton clean sheet against Everton? Right now, from a clean sheet perspective, I'm not too bullish on Southampton in terms of what they offer. I'm just bringing up, again, you guys were able to see this, I do apologise, but I hope it does provide value in me just kind of telling you this. Looking at their expected goals conceded so far this season, Southampton are actually coming out really solid, actually, over the course of the season. 8.65 expected goals conceded, and they've actually conceded 11. So they really are underperforming their expected goals conceded. They're actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're 10th best for defensive underlying stats, which is really surprising to see. So, look, I think if Lavia returns, which is a big impact for them positively, then Southampton could be ones to look at. But right now, I'm not bullish on them as we speak. Chris Town, hope you're doing well. Late to the stream, thoughts on double Chelsea defence, Cucurella and James. Absolutely love James. James would be an essential pick for me if you're on a wildcard. Cucurella, I absolutely think that he is in Graham Potter's starting 11 if he had to pick one for a Champions League final. He obviously is a big admirer of him, and I think he is going to continue to do great work under Graham Potter. But I think for a defensive double up right now, I probably wouldn't go for Cucurella. Again, my advice would have been Fofana, but I still don't think Fofana is going to be guaranteed game time in this Chelsea team, while Potter understands the player and the best team. So I think one Chelsea defensive player is the right move for you right now. We gain some information on who Potter's favourable back three and wing backs are, and then we look to invest in them later down the line. I don't think Cucurella is going to be a difficult player for you to afford, because you can go sideways on a lot of players to get to him. I think James is the priority right now, because I don't see anybody playing as a right wing back other than Reece James. And is there any information about railway workers' strike? Heard some rumours about some in game week 9. Yes, I think there are, of course, rumours about the rail strikes, but I think there is... The recent information has been that they have made contingency plans if it does happen for the fixtures to go ahead. I don't think it's enough to worry about right now, but it's enough of a reason for us not to make any early transfers. Of course, if you're on your wildcard, then it makes no difference whatsoever. But if you have your free transfers for game week 9, enough for a reason to wait until the deadline to make those transfers on the day rather than 10 days before, which just is never advisable at all. Eddie, no worries at all. Eric, need help on my 11th man. Brentford's Jensen away against Bournemouth or Andreas at home versus Newcastle. I probably would go for Andreas of the two personally. On set pieces, worth noting that Willian has taken a few set pieces away from Andreas, which is a big shame. But for me, I personally think that Andreas would be my pick of the two there. Yeah, Sino saying, guess you will go watch England versus Italy now. Good luck. Not the biggest on watching international games, but I might dip in and out of the game. But no, thank you very much for tuning in. So, guys, that is going to wrap up today's live stream. I think we've been yatting on for about an hour or so, but hopefully it has been beneficial to you guys. Again, because we are midway through the international break, it's very difficult to come to any conclusions for our wildcard drafts or transfers in general. It is worth noting. So I am very thankful for you guys tuning into this live stream, as I appreciate FPL isn't the top of the agenda for a lot of managers right now. So all I can ask, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you can drop a like on your way out, it'll be massively appreciated. We always try and hit 50 likes. I see 138 right now. If you haven't liked it already, and you can do so, that would be massively appreciated. For those who are on Wildcard, as I said, my biggest advice right now is downloading the Fantasy Football Fix app, which is totally free. Main reason being is you can check out the price change predictor. So any players that are potentially rising or falling in price that you own, you can make sure that you are selling or buying in plenty of time. You don't want to be caught out in that sense. And obviously subscribe, guys. We have plenty of content dropping each and every day. Really important stuff for those that are particularly on Wildcard. So make sure you are doing that. And I will see you guys in the next video, which is going to be next week, Monday. And of course, the Friday live stream, which is always happening. And I'll see you guys then. Take care.